Begin this morning with breaking news. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi says federal agents have arrested 4 people, among those former CNN anchor Don Lemon.
Minneapolis was shaken as federal agents hit multiple locations, uncovering a criminal empire years in the making. They seized 9,700 pounds of narcotics, exposed $69 million in bribes, and revealed a visa fraud scheme that had fooled authorities for years. Hidden in plain sight, this massive network is finally brought to light. Background: Minneapolis never expected to become ground zero for one of the most significant federal enforcement operations in recent memory. The Twin Cities had long been a focal point for immigration debates, but by early 2026, those debates shifted from political theory to criminal reality. Operation Metro Surge changed everything. Launched by the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, this operation targeted criminal non-citizens across major American cities. Minneapolis became a priority location not because of politics, but because of patterns federal investigators could no longer ignore. The numbers told a troubling story. ICE arrests in the Twin Cities during Metro Surge included individuals with serious criminal records, convicted drug traffickers, perpetrators of fraud schemes, violent offenders including rapists and murderers. These weren't immigration violations in the abstract. These were dangerous people who had exploited gaps in the system to remain in the country while committing crimes. But the criminal activity went deeper than individual cases. Federal investigators began noticing patterns that suggested organized networks rather than isolated incidents. Cash smuggling operations at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport had been documented for years. Large sums of currency were being moved through luggage, often declared improperly or hidden entirely. Where there's cash movement at that scale, investigators know to look for the source. Daycare fraud networks had previously made headlines in Minnesota. Criminal organizations exploited childcare assistance programs, creating phantom daycares or inflating attendance numbers to fraudulently claim millions in government benefits. The money didn't fund childcare, it funded criminal enterprises. Somali-linked remittance and courier operations came under scrutiny not because of ethnicity, but because criminal elements embedded themselves within legitimate diaspora financial networks. Families sending money home to relatives in Somalia used legal channels. Criminals used those same channels to move illicit proceeds, hiding dirty money among legitimate transactions. Federal agencies, including the FBI, DEA, and Treasury Department, had been running parallel investigations. Operation Paris and Twin Shield examined refugee resettlement fraud and benefit scheme. Investigators found cases where individuals lied about identities, relationships, or circumstances to gain entry or benefits. Some cases involved simple desperation. Others revealed sophisticated fraud operations processing dozens or hundreds of fake applications. The political environment complicated enforcement efforts. Minneapolis adopted sanctuary policies limiting cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities. City leadership argued these policies protected immigrant communities from overreach. Federal agents argued these policies provided cover for criminals. Protests erupted when ICE conducted arrests. Crowds gathered to block vehicles, sometimes turning confrontational. Officers faced verbal abuse, physical obstruction, and in some cases, violence. Recent incidents included fatal shootings during enforcement actions and assaults on federal agents attempting to execute warrants. Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey publicly criticized federal immigration enforcement, creating tension between state, local, and federal authorities. This friction didn't stop investigations, but it made coordination more difficult and operations more dangerous for agents on the ground. Amid this backdrop, federal investigators were building a case that would dwarf previous Minnesota scandals. What started as routine immigration enforcement uncovered corruption so deep it compromised the judicial system itself. The pieces were scattered across multiple investigations, but a pattern emerged. Immigration cases were being approved at rates that defied statistical probability. Money was moving through accounts connected to those same cases, and sitting at the center of this web was someone with the power to approve or deny entry to the United States. But all these separate investigations were about to connect in ways nobody expected. One frozen morning would change everything forever. The alleged operation. Pre-dawn operations are standard for federal law enforcement when executing high-risk warrants. Darkness provides tactical advantage, and early morning hours catch targets before they're fully alert. For the operation that became known as Ice Storm, those advantages were essential. At 4:47 a.m. on a frozen Minneapolis morning, federal convoys moved into position. The temperature sat at 11 degrees, streets empty except for the occasional snowplow. Inside unmarked vehicles, agents from the FBI, ICE, DEA, and US Marshal Service ran final checks on equipment and reviewed target locations. The operation hit 7 sites simultaneously, a coordination feat requiring months of planning. Primary targets included warehouses in industrial areas outside the city, residential properties in wealthy neighborhoods, and offices downtown. Each team knew their role. Each location represented a piece of a larger criminal enterprise. The first breach occurred at a warehouse registered as a storage facility for household goods. The building sat in a commercial zone where businesses minded their own affairs and security cameras were sparse. On paper, the warehouse stored furniture and personal belongings for clients. Federal investigators knew different. When the battering ram struck the loading dock door, agents flooded inside with weapons drawn. What they found confirmed months of surveillance and intelligence gathering. This wasn't a storage facility, it was a distribution hub. The first area they cleared contained wooden crates stacked on industrial shelving. Opening those crates revealed vacuum-sealed packages, each marked with codes that meant nothing to civilians, but everything to traffickers. The packages contained methamphetamine, fentanyl, and other narcotics in quantities that made even experienced agents pause. As teams moved deeper into the warehouse, the scale became apparent. 9,700 pounds of drugs. To grasp that number, picture not a personal stash or even a major dealer's inventory. Picture an industrial operation designed to supply entire regions. The street value climbed into tens of millions of dollars. But the real cost was measured in overdoses, addictions, and ruined lives. Manifests found on clipboards and in filing cabinets detailed distribution plans. The drugs were scheduled for delivery to 14 cities, including Chicago, Detroit, Seattle, and New York, within the next 10 days. The raid had intercepted a massive shipment before it dispersed across the country. As teams moved deeper into the warehouse, the scale became apparent. 9,700 pounds of drugs. To grasp that number, picture not a personal stash or even a major dealer's inventory. Picture an industrial operation designed to supply entire regions. The street value climbed into tens of millions of dollars, but the real cost was measured in overdoses, addictions, and ruined lives. While the warehouse team secured evidence, a second tactical unit hit a residential property in Edina, one of Minneapolis's wealthiest suburbs. The home belonged to a person of interest whose financial records showed income that didn't match their declared employment. From the outside, the property looked like any other luxury residence: manicured lawn, expensive cars, quiet street. Inside told a different story. In the master bedroom, agents found 3 safes. The first contained $340,000 in cash, bundled in rubber-bounded stacks of $100 bills. The second held 23 passports with different names but similar photographs, evidence of identity fraud and document forgery. The third safe contained encrypted hard drives that would later prove crucial to the investigation. A third team executed a warrant at a downtown office. This location drew particular attention because it represented the corruption that enabled the entire operation. The office belonged to an immigration judge, someone entrusted with deciding who could remain in America and who faced deportation. Behind a false panel in the wall, agents discovered 11 encrypted cell phones. These burner devices contained thousands of messages, not personal conversations, but operational communications. Clear the transfer by Wednesday. Approve application 7741. No interview required. Ensure no secondary review. These weren't suggestions. These were orders from a sitting federal judge directing staff to bypass security protocols designed to prevent fraud. Each message represented a compromise of the judicial process, a case approved not on merit, but on payment. Locked filing cabinets yielded handwritten ledgers detailing every fraudulent approval. Case numbers, dates, amounts paid, all meticulously recorded. One ledger alone listed 892 approvals, each marked with a red check indicating payment received. The amounts ranged from $15,000 to $22,000 per case. Simultaneously, forensic accountants working with the FBI traced financial flows through shell companies. Entities with names like Global Consulting Services and Horizon Legal Solutions appeared legitimate on paper, registered in Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming, complete with professional websites and business addresses. In reality, these were fronts designed to launder bribe payments. The money trail led to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Dubai. Wire transfers totaling $69 million moved through these accounts over 4 years. Treasury analysts matched the transfer amounts to approved immigration cases, creating an irrefutable link between payments and judicial decisions. The operation didn't just move money and drugs, it moved people. The criminal network used fraudulently approved immigration cases as cover for smuggling operations. Individuals with no legitimate asylum claims paid for guaranteed approval, then used their legal status to facilitate drug trafficking and other criminal activities. At a townhouse in Bloomington, agents uncovered a forgery operation. The space looked like a small office, complete with computers, printers, and laminating equipment. But instead of producing legitimate documents, operators here manufactured fake identities. 418 forged documents were seized: social security cards, driver's licenses, and official seals from 6 different countries. The quality of the forgeries impressed even experienced agents. These weren't crude fakes produced in someone's basement. These were professionally manufactured documents that could pass initial scrutiny, complete with security features, proper formatting, and convincing details. As evidence accumulated, one question dominated communications between teams. Where is the judge? The primary target, the immigration judge whose corruption enabled the entire network, wasn't at home, wasn't at the office, and wasn't answering phones. As teams secured evidence across the city, one urgent question remained unanswered. Where was the judge who made it all possible? The airport arrest. At 6:41 a.m., an ICE agent stationed at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport sent an alert that instantly changed the operation's timeline. A private jet had filed a flight plan to Dubai, with departure scheduled for 7:15 a.m. The passenger manifest listed only one name: Judge Layla Mahad. Agent Marcus Chun, leading the operation from a federal command center, grabbed his radio. All units, target is attempting to flee the country. Interdiction authorized. Within moments, 6 federal vehicles tore toward the airport, lights flashing, sirens cutting through the early morning silence. Speed limits didn't matter. this wasn't about traffic. This was about preventing a high-profile fugitive from escaping justice. At 6:58 a.m., Judge Mahard walked through the private aviation lounge, calm and composed. She wore a tailored black coat and carried a single leather bag. To any casual observer, she was just another wealthy traveler catching an early flight. She had no idea that federal agents were already in position, watching every step. When agents moved in, it was swift and precise. "Layla Mahad, you are under arrest." She turned slowly, showing no shock, no panic, only cold calculation. "On what charges?" she asked, as if still presiding over a courtroom where she held ultimate authority. The response was methodical. "Corruption, racketeering, conspiracy, immigration fraud, money laundering. Shall I continue?" As the handcuffs clicked on her wrists, she whispered 3 chilling words that would later appear in official reports. "You have no idea what you've just done." Even caught in the act of fleeing with mountains of evidence against her, Judge Mahad's arrogance was absolute. She still believed she wielded power, that protection lay somewhere beyond reach of federal law. By 8:15 a.m., federal prosecutors unsealed a 74-page indictment detailing the catastrophic charges: 18 counts of corruption, 23 counts of wire fraud, 9 counts of racketeering. If convicted on all counts, she faced 340 years in federal prison, a sentence ensuring she would die behind bars. The indictment, however, reached far beyond one corrupt judge. It named 29 co-conspirators, smugglers, money launderers, forgers, and facilitators who had operated under her protection. These were not small-time criminals. This was an organized empire built on manipulated immigration proceedings, bribery, and carefully orchestrated fraud. By mid-morning, the operation had already rippled across Minneapolis and beyond. Federal agents continued to execute warrants, seize evidence, and dismantle a network that had flourished in plain sight. The arrest of Judge Mahard marked the beginning of a historic crackdown, a moment that exposed how deep corruption had penetrated the system and how far federal law enforcement would go to restore justice. Her arrest was just the beginning. Within hours, agents were moving on targets across 7 states. The entire empire was crumbling fast. The network collapses. Coordinated arrests began unfolding across 7 states within hours of the Minneapolis raids. In San Diego, agents raided a warehouse belonging to Tahir Youssef, recovering 89 kilograms of fentanyl and 341 kilograms of methamphetamine. The facility had been operating as a West Coast distribution point, receiving shipments facilitated through fraudulent immigration approvals. In New Hampshire, a crackdown netted dozens of arrests and seized over $100,000 in cash. These individuals had been processed through Judge Mahard's court, granted legal status despite having no legitimate claims, and immediately began criminal operations. Abdi Hassan, identified as a logistics coordinator for the network, was arrested at a residence in Maine. Agents seized $1,200,000 in cash from the property, along with documents linking him to dozens of fraudulent immigration cases. Hassan had been communicating directly with Judge Mahard using encrypted phones, receiving case numbers and instructions for which applications to prioritize. Farah Osman, described in court documents as a money courier, was arrested in California. Her role involved collecting payments from individuals seeking immigration approvals, routing money through shell companies, and delivering it to accounts controlled by Judge Mahard. Financial records showed Osman handled over $12 million in transactions during a 3-year period. As arrests multiplied, the full scope of corruption became clear. Between 2021 and 2024, Judge Mahard had processed 3,847 asylum applications, a number that seemed reasonable until investigators examined the timeline. Standard asylum cases require months of processing, background checks, interviews, document verification, and security screenings. Judge Mahad was approving cases in hours. A routine audit in March 2023 had flagged the first anomaly: 214 approvals processed in a single week. That number was statistically impossible for legitimate cases. But the audit got buried in bureaucracy, delayed by staffing shortages and competing priorities. Had that audit been acted upon immediately, investigators estimate over 2,000 fraudulent approvals could have been prevented. The Treasury Department's parallel investigation revealed how Judge Mahad monetized her position. The price of American citizenship was $18,000, paid through shell companies designed to look like legal consulting firms. These entities had professional websites, business addresses, and employee rosters. All of it was facade. In just 4 years, Judge Mahad processed $69,200,000 in fraudulent immigration approvals. Treasury analysts confirmed wire transfers matching that exact amount moving through her offshore accounts. The correlation was too precise to be coincidence, but the network extended beyond immigration fraud. The Somali Brotherhood network, tracked by federal agents since 2019, operated across 7 states, from Minnesota to Maine and as far west as California. Their business model integrated multiple criminal enterprises, smuggling people, forging documents, trafficking drugs, and laundering money. Judge Mahad's corrupted approvals provided the foundation. Once individuals gained legal status through her court, they became useful to the network in ways that had nothing to do with asylum. They could rent properties for stash houses, open bank accounts for money laundering, obtain commercial licenses for logistics operations, and move freely without immigration enforcement concerns. The investigation identified communications between Judge Mahad and 11 other immigration officials, judges, case managers, and asylum officers. The Department of Justice opened investigations into 19 federal employees. The corruption wasn't limited to one judge in one city. It was systemic. Investigators discovered approximately 47,000 asylum applications had been approved fraudulently across the country during this period. The financial impact exceeded $1.4 billion in defrauded benefits. But numbers alone can't capture the security implications. Weapons seized during the Minneapolis warehouse raid were ballistically matched to 23 unsolved homicides across the Midwest. The drugs recovered were linked to 89 overdose deaths based on packaging and distribution patterns. Judge Mahad had enabled murderers, armed violent criminals, and drug traffickers to operate freely within the United States. With dozens arrested and millions seized, the evidence was overwhelming. Now, the woman behind it all would finally face a jury. The trial and sentencing. On March 18, 2025, Judge Mahad's trial began in federal court. The evidence presented was overwhelming in both scope and detail. Prosecutors played audio recordings from encrypted phones, conversations between Judge Mahad and criminal operatives discussing specific cases, payment amounts, and timelines for approvals. They displayed the handwritten ledgers recovered from her office, showing 892 fraudulent approvals with corresponding payments. They presented bank records tracing $69 million through shell companies to her offshore accounts. Witnesses testified about paying bribes in exchange for guaranteed immigration approvals. The defense attempted to argue entrapment, claiming Judge Mahad had been coerced or manipulated by the criminal network. But the evidence showed she had initiated contacts, set prices, and actively directed the fraud operation. There was no coercion, only greed. On April 22nd, after 11 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with verdicts, guilty on all counts. The courtroom remained silent as the verdicts were read. Judge Mahad showed no visible reaction, maintaining the same cold composure she had displayed since her arrest. At the sentencing hearing, she stood before a fellow federal judge who looked down at her with unmistakable disgust. "You were entrusted with one of the most important responsibilities in our legal system," the sentencing judge stated. "You decided who could seek safety in America and who faced return to danger. You sold that sacred trust for cash. You enabled criminals. You endangered innocent lives." The sentence was severe and deliberate. 28 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. She was ordered to forfeit assets totaling $31,700,000 and pay restitution to victims. As marshals led her from the courtroom in handcuffs, the reality set in. She would die in prison. But accountability did not end with one sentence. By August 2025, 41 other officials connected to the corruption network had been convicted. Sentences ranged from 8 years to life in prison, depending on the individual's role and criminal history. The federal government seized a total of $487 million in dirty assets, cash, properties, vehicles, and accounts connected to the fraud network. These seizures represented the largest forfeiture action in immigration fraud history. The guilty verdicts brought justice, but the real question remained: could the broken system be fixed to prevent this from happening again? Reforms and lasting impact. The exposure of Judge Mahad's corruption network prompted immediate reforms within the immigration court system. The Justice Department implemented new oversight protocols requiring secondary review of cases processed faster than average timelines. Audits became mandatory quarterly rather than annual, with automated flags for statistical anomalies. Fraudulent asylum approvals dropped by 91% by the end of 2025, according to Department of Homeland Security data. That decrease wasn't because fewer people sought asylum. It reflected improved screening and the removal of corrupted officials from the approval process. The Minneapolis case proved that corruption does not announce itself with obvious signs. It hides behind professional titles, judicial robes, and the facade of compassion. Judge Mahad presented herself as someone who cared about vulnerable people seeking safety. In reality, she monetized their desperation while enabling violent criminals. Federal investigators demonstrated that when agencies coordinate effectively and follow evidence wherever it leads, even deeply buried corruption can be exposed. The operation required patience, 9 months of surveillance, years of financial investigation, and coordination across multiple states and agencies. The 9,700 pounds of drugs seized represented poison that would have reached streets across America. The $69 million in bribes represented a corrupted judicial process that undermined legitimate asylum seekers who followed proper procedures. The 29 arrests dismantled a criminal network that had operated with impunity for years. Federal agents exposed a sprawling network of corruption, drugs, and fraud, with a judge selling justice for cash. The criminals are behind bars, and the system is being repaired. Stay informed. Subscribe now to follow every case where justice prevails and corrupt officials face the consequences they deserve.